So as I've been so warmly introduced, I'm Stefanie Gigante. I'm a Technology Innovation Specialist in my district. I've been teaching for 16 years. I am not quite as advanced in Cambridge years, but I have been, around a little bit. So tonight I wanted to start with, what do you think of when you think of student reflection? So I'd like for you to think about, when you came to this webinar tonight, what did you have as sort of a preconceived notion about it? And right now on your screens, if you've logged into the Pairdeck, you can just type a response that has to do with, that would answer the question. So I'll give you a few seconds to compose an answer, and then we can look at them together. We have 5 responses, so I'm going to click Show Responses. Students think about what went well in their learning. Students think about what they've learned in class. Giving students a chance. Accountability. Metacognition. Yep, thinking about their own learning. I agree with you. Student reflection has a lot of those elements to it. In fact, the area of student reflection is sort of a broad topic in general. So we're going to look at how student reflection is defined in 2 different ways. The first way is through an article that I read that was really a very compelling one, and it spoke about reflection. And one of the best quotes that I got was, reflection is a widely discussed tool for promoting learning, promoting higher order thinking skills, developing professional practice, and facilitating and structuring learning through experience. Now on your screens in the Pairdeck, it's taken you to an Edutopia website, and the Edutopia website has a blog article about reflection, and this is what it looks like. Reflecting on Reflection, a Habit of Mind. And I know that you all can read, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. But I wanted to sort of introduce what some of our educational community is saying about what student reflection is. To reflect, obviously, means to look back at how something went in all of its available parts. So now that can be with regard to assessments, with regard to activities, with regard to, what's happening in the plot line of all of our stories. One of the, obviously there's some bulleted points here that sort of codify what reflection is like and how we can sort of narrow it down, or at least give some specifics to students to help them do it. And there are a lot of different ways that we can put reflection into practice. So I'm going to let you browse the Edutopia article, keep your browser up, and we're going to go back to the presentation, and we'll talk about how this reflection can look using a couple of different EdTech tools. So now that we've sort of gotten sort of a common understanding about reflection, I'm curious to know, what reflection practices, if any, do you currently use in your classes? So if you don't mind just typing a fast response, it could be something small, it could be something big, anything that you think that you're already doing that could qualify as reflection. I'm going to start looking at the responses. A quarterly survey, self-evaluation, discussion during final minutes of class. Sometimes that's done in a whole group, and sometimes it's done on an individual. And students reflect on after assessments what they did well or where they might have improvement. All right, good. So these are all things that you already do. And tonight I'm going to introduce you to some ways to sort of amplify that within the scope of Cambridge. So things that we're going to sort of focus on with the EdTech tools, about forming judgments and forming a rationale. And that rationale could be about how to use the passive periphrastic correctly, or it could be a rationale for why a character is acting the way they are or reacting the way they are. Anything in that helps a student demonstrate learning in a way that thinks forward, even though obviously the act of reflection is looking backward, but it helps the students sort of propel their thoughts in a very progressive way. Reflection really has a lot of higher order thinking skills, which we're going to get to in just a second as well. Reflection often features thinking critically about the content, about the student's performance, about anything that's happening in class, activities that they've done, instruction that you've given, maybe a preparation that's happening for an upcoming test or quiz. And then we also want to help students develop a sense for strengths and weaknesses, both within themselves as well as looking back on, again, some of the characters or the plot line within the storyline that we're reading from.
Stefanie, it's Martha. Could you repeat the code for Pairdeck?
Sure. So after joinpd.com, the code is OLDJU.
Thank you.
Sure. In our old Bloom's taxonomy that we all still rely on, I think very much in teaching to understand and to discern how to effectively promote our lessons, you can see that reflection has lots of different purposes in our big pyramid here. Bloom's taxonomy helps us with memory in terms of identifying things one way or the other, understanding both what's happened as well as working on understanding ourselves, or the students understanding themselves as it is, applying the knowledge that they are reflecting on in new situations, analyzing the content or the lesson or their own behavior and reactions, or the character analysis that they might be doing. Reflection helps students learn how to evaluate a certain situation. Sometimes it's evaluating the strength or the worthiness of their grade, worthiness from their perspective, like, was it really worth me getting upset because I got a B, or was it worth me studying in this way because did that get me a specific grade that I was looking for? So that's what I meant by worthiness. And then, of course, at the top of the pyramid are those rarely seen opportunities for creating. And a lot of the tools that I'm going to show you tonight give students a chance to create things on their own and to develop their own approach to the content, which, again, these are all skills that we want students to have for the long run. As you're going to see in a lot of the research on reflective learning, one of the hallmarks of having a reflective environment in your classroom is to have an active classroom. You want classrooms where students are consistently participating in a variety of different ways. So right now, I'd like for you to think quickly about how you, in your classroom, how do you demonstrate an active classroom? What ways do you have? Movement, yes, I'm a big fan of kinesthetic learning too. Different groupings, games, encouraging students to participate, working collaboratively, excellent. These are all ways that you are already cognizant of the fact that you want to provide students with an active classroom. So I'm going to give you some tools to use to also make your classroom active, but obviously with a technological bend. The first one that we're going to talk about is Pairdeck, which is the one that you're using now. So as you can see, Pairdeck is an interactive presentation-based software. So if you have presentations existing from, maybe you've been teaching out of Cambridge for 20 years and you already have a lot of PowerPoints that contain a lot of your content, that's fine. You can totally use that in a Pairdeck environment, and you can adapt your slide presentations to have Pairdeck. So Pairdeck allows you to present information to students as well as elicit responses from them as often as you wish throughout the presentation. There are a lot of templates for slides, and those templates of slides, number one, encourage critical thinking, but number two, they encourage students to examine what's really going on and maybe give some sort of response based on what's happening. One of the things I love about Pairdeck is, as you've seen with what I've just shown you, is that all the answers that students give are anonymous. Now, you all saw that you had to log in using your Google account. So the same would be true for a classroom environment in which students would have to give their Google ID just to log in. But during the course of a presentation, everything is 100% anonymous. So, I teach in a high school, and I know that, there's nothing worse than in a high school classroom than the idea of being wrong. And I respect that kids don't like having that mark on their back. Or, maybe you're the student who's always right and the kids are kind of sick of you being right all the time too. Having Pairdeck be anonymous in the classroom setting is beautiful because it allows for kids to just be themselves. On the flip side, though, because everybody has logged in with their Google addresses, I can see which students are answering in which ways. And that helps me to really, teach concepts in a different way, or maybe a student is reflecting very negatively on an experience when in reality he's actually not doing it badly at all, and so maybe that's a good time to conference with him and say, I have a suggestion to help you feel better about this, or I have a suggestion to make this better. So as you can see, it allows for simultaneous instruction in a rather direct way, but also reflection and of course application too. So I'm going to take you into a quick tour of Pairdeck. In Pairdeck nowadays, you start in Google Slides. Any slide presentation will do, and that's why I mentioned that if you were to have a PowerPoint presentation, you can just bring that into Google Slides. It'll adapt it to become a slides presentation. And instead of, I'm taking out the themes temporarily, you're going to click on add-ons. If you don't already have Pairdeck, you would just go to Get Add-ons. When you go to the Get Add-ons screen, you will find Pairdeck, and then you will, apply it to your Google account. Once it's in your Google account, it's always there. So when I do add-ons, I select Pairdeck, and I open the Pairdeck add-on. And then that allows me that no matter what slide I create, I can always apply some sort of Pairdeck mechanism. And you don't always want students writing everything on every slide, right? You do want it to be able to be, you do want to be able to give information too and teach students about stuff. But every slide that you have, you can make it into a beginning of the lesson slide, for example. This is what I was talking about with the templates. What do you want to know about today's topic? Everything within the templates is editable. Well, obviously the template background color and stuff, that's not editable. But what did you learn from the homework? Trying to get them at the very beginning of class to think about how it went for them. Especially if you do like a flipped classroom type model where you have students learning things outside the classroom. So maybe have students reflect on what it is that they actually gained, or did they just copy down your slides? So that's a good way to sort of warm up the class and get them thinking about things that have happened prior. And you could use this too. One of the hallmarks of the Cambridge teaching approach, as I've gathered at all the workshops that I've been to, is the idea of pre-reading a story, reading a story, and then post-reading, if you will, of a story, going back and, consistently rehashing the storyline and the characters to make sure that that's a nice, smooth, linear progression for the students. So using an opening, a bell ringer type activity like this, how do you think Modestus felt at the end of that story? Or what do you think Salvius is going to do now that he has, killed Dumnorix? So getting kids to think about what has happened beforehand, but in a productive way that's going to help them set the stage for what's going forward. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the hallmark of reflection as being helpful for progressive thought, even though obviously reflection itself has that idea of looking backwards. You might be right now in your own Google Slides kind of like, tooling around with Pairdeck, so I don't want to bore you by reading everything. During the lesson, they also have some templates that help students stop and think and organize their thoughts. So this one says, summarize what you've just learned. You could have, a really long slide presentation that sometimes, kids are kind of tuning out at a certain point. But if you can stop them every now and again and say, okay, what did you just learn? What's going on? What's going through your brain when I was saying all these things? You could do down here, there are a couple of temperature checks, if you will. And the temperature check is, drag your dot to how you're feeling. I feel great. That's the green. I'm kind of shaky on the material. That's yellow. And then red is stop. You need to go over that again because I lost you at passive paraphrastic. So you can use that as like a quick add-on. Obviously, they have lots and lots of things that you can choose from, but the beauty of having Pairdeck in Google Slides is that you can have anything as the background of your slides. If I wanted to insert an image, I could select, I don't know, let's see what comes up first in my drive. Let's see here. Oh, here we go, a meme from a student. I don't know why it's such a weird Bitmoji, or I mean a 8-bit image of an apple, but anyway, so you can manipulate the slides any way you want. And then instead of using one of these templates, if you're designing your own slide presentation, or if you're bringing something in from PowerPoint, all you have to do is you're going to scroll down here where it says ask students a question. And this represents all the possible things that you can have students do in a slide. So I've already showed you what it looks like to get a text response from them. I have not showed you multiple choice yet, but you can ask for a number instead of just a regular text response. You can, as I just showed you, send students to a website, or you can have students draw on a slide. So you could say, teach the imperfect tense subjunctive and then have like a whole splash of verbs on the next slide and say circle all the ones that you recognize as being imperfect subjunctive, right? So they're using the knowledge that they have, reflecting back to, how they got there and then being able to differentiate. Finally, there's this option of draggable, and in a draggable, the students can they can drag any icon that you ask them to anywhere on the image. So there are, as you can see, a variety of things that you can drag on the image to indicate something. So maybe you could have sentences that portray, one of the new grammar things that you've taught, maybe the dative case or something like that. And you could have the indirect object be represented by this icon of a person and say, okay, in this sentence, drag the person to the word that's in the dative case, who's receiving the thing. You can change the color of your draggable, and you can also change the size depending on what kind of picture or what kind of sentence you have as well. Up here, there are two other options for templates for you within Pairdeck. One of them is end of lesson. So in 1 minute, write the most important thing. I know that a lot of us tend to do closure activities. I have a wonderful colleague who does a written closure activity every single day, and it's marvelous, and I respect the heck out of her for doing it, but the poor girl is like up to her ears in pieces of paper at the end of the day. So you could achieve a similar concept by using a Pairdeck slide of just, okay, now that I've taught you about the story of Salvius Concilium Cognoscit, tell me the most important fact about that story. And it could be in Latin, it could be in English, whatever you want to do. This is another great one. Pretend your friend was absent from class today. I've actually used that live, and I've said, hey guys, James was absent from class. Summarize it for him because he needs some sort of, update. Drawing or typing things that you learned in the lesson. So these are good things for end of the lesson. And then under this guise of featured content, Pairdeck has a whole slew of what they call critical thinking slides. And these are a really, really important tool to have as you're creating your own slideshow for your students and you're teaching them things and you're asking them to pause within a lesson or pause within an activity to make differentiation between different content or apply things that they've learned. So this one is making connections between two things. So for something like that, I have in mind in epistolocephaly in Unit 3. I teach mostly out of Unit 3, so you'll have to pardon my sort of exclusionary references just to the Green Book there. I'm sorry?
We like Unit 3 a lot, so.
Okay. So epistolocephaly is the letter for Cephalus that after he attempts to poison Cogidebnus and after he's killed, he recounts how he was forced to do this because of memoir. So there's an activity that I know that the Cambridge University Press has as like a worksheet to kind of cross-reference the things that he says, that Cephalus says in the letter, with the story 2 stages earlier of what memoir actually asked him to do. So you could use this slide here for that. Make connections between things that you've already studied and things that you already know and what's happening now in terms of our plot line. Considering different viewpoints is a phenomenal thing, and I'm pretty sure that we probably all do activities like this already. Maybe you have students write a paragraph or write a letter from one character to another. This is a great way of doing it in class and kind of on the spot, but also collecting data in a faster way and not having to go through a pile of papers. And I don't need to read every single slide to you, but I was trying to give you some ideas of what you could use these slides for within a presentation. Obviously there's an interpretation thing, an explanation one. So have fun with it, because Pairdeck has a lot of options that I think you're going to like. So getting back to our original presentation, if you still have it open in one of your tabs, a couple quick perks for you too. You can export the results, so all the students answer, they export in a Google Sheet. If you have the premium version of Pairdeck, which I'm lucky enough to have, at the end of a lesson, you can create what's called a takeaway document. And a takeaway document is a document that has a copy of every single slide, as well as a place for students to summarize it. Let me actually show you that, because that's actually a really cool feature. It automatically creates this folder in your drive, and look, I have takeaways here. So any presentation that you ever do, let's do this. This is what the takeaway documents look like. And you could assign a takeaway document as a homework assignment to have students reflect on the activity that they did. So this document is automatically shared between the student who completed the answers and me, since I'm the one who created the Pairdeck. So it's just a conversation between me and the student about this particular topic. It provides them with a chance to summarize something. It gives them their responses, and then under each thing it says use this space for notes. And you can't get a better reflection tool than a document that says, hey, this is what we did in class today. Now think about it and make sense of it, summarize it and think about it a little bit more. So that's the takeaway. You can also, you can preload it with questions, but you can ask different questions mid-presentation. And as I showed you, there are a bunch of different questions to choose from. So knowing what you know about Pairdeck, oh, sorry, I forgot that I had some applications for you all to consider too. I feel like I've given you a handful of suggestions, so I'm not going to read everything to you here. But for example, I love using the think questions that are in the Elevate website. So create your own think paragraphs, think questions, take texts from stories, even just within the textbook or newer stories so that they can practice reading comprehension skills, have them circle words or have them, answer multiple choice questions about, which of the 3 actions or which 3 actions happened in the first paragraph or something like that. While you're in the middle of a story reading, you could use those critical thinking templates to ask, further questions about the characters. You could also assign, you can make a Pairdeck, a self-paced Pairdeck, and you can assign that as a homework assignment. You could have students interpret various events and characters. And you could also utilize all the interactive templates in class. So now, this is what I was getting at before. if I made you use Pairdeck next week, what's one thing that you think you could use it for with some ease? So see if you can just think of one thing. I'm not going to make you do it, obviously.
I think somebody needs the Google link again. Could you repeat that?
Join.
Sure. It's joinpd.com. And then the presentation code is OLDJU.
I'm pointing to it on the screen.
All right, so group translation, reviewing contents of story, feedback on new grammar, good. Finding out if students understand the presentation in real time. Students tend to read on their own. Wow, you got good kids. Reflecting on comfort level with declensions. I like it. Reflecting on independent reading. That's also a great use for it too, because if everybody's sort of on their own schedule, it's hard, or in their own work too, it's hard to get them on the same page in terms of what they're reflecting or where they're reflecting. Assessing their work level and energy levels. Excellent. All right, cool. So I feel like you're all ready to get something out of Pairdeck, which is great. I have other things I want to show you though, so I'm going to move on and I'm going to let you guys play with Pairdeck on your own. Another suggestion for an active classroom is something called Socrative. Socrative allows for in-class formative assessments. You can ask open-ended questions, you could ask multiple choice questions, and you can review answers as a class. So I have my Socrative tab open right here. You would go to Socrative.com. It's like Socrates, but it's IVE instead of his actual name. You would need to create a teacher account, which is what I brought up here. Once you can make quizzes and have them sort of like preloaded for activities. And then once you have created the quiz, you can launch them. Also, because you start on the launch screen, you can also just ask a quick question. So you could use this, again, for the average closure activity, where you've presented content, you've read a story, you've done something. Just ask a really fast question that has short answer to it, and you can write in your question text, and then you just launch your question, and the students answer it right away. So, I mean, you could theoretically do a space race, which is sort of a more involved game, but you would really need a pre-planned quiz for an activity like that. But one of the things that you could do when you launch a quiz is, and I'm going to show you this here. So this is the quiz that I chose, and I'm going to click next. Now, instant feedback is probably best for multiple choice because it tells the kid whether they're right or wrong. Now, I will say, although in open-ended questions on Socrative, it does have the ability to tell the student if they're right or wrong based on what they enter. However, you know that kids are technology doesn't really go well with a language, right? Because if the kid adds an extra E at the end of an infinitive or something, it's going to mark them as wrong, even though they have the right concept in general, they just happen to spell it wrong, or cognoscere. How many misspellings have we seen of that verb? So if you don't want students to feel like they're getting penalized for the wrong spelling, then you might just want to do not an instant feedback thing. Open navigation, yeah. Sure.
The way you use this with students is you give them a code again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, once you open a Socrative account, you get to choose what's called your, I think it's called your classroom name. When I joined in the dark ages of Socrative, everybody got a number instead of a classroom name. So I just tell students go to Socrative.com and then they type in my classroom number. Now, the good thing is once you get a classroom name or number, that sticks with you for life. So you never have to change it. So the students will always know that when they're in my classroom, it's 177594. The open navigation that's here means that students have, a 5 or 10 question quiz, and they can toggle back and forth between the answers to check their work, to, take extra time, and they only submit the whole thing at once instead of question by question. But one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention for the purpose of reflection is what's called teacher paced, which is that essentially we do one question at a time. And when we do that one question, we can talk about things in a very general sense. And then they only go on when I'm ready to go on. So this is how it would look on the screen. This is what would be projected for the students. They will enter this code 177594, and then they will be able to put in their responses to the question. Here you have options to either hide the answers or show the answers, and either show names or hide names. So you can show names if you want to make sure that everybody in the class is participating or something like that. But you can also hide names to make this, again, an anonymous adventure that students feel comfortable reflecting on their strengths and their weaknesses. The show answers tool helps you to sort of control. You don't necessarily want them just looking at everybody else's answers and making one that's based on that and not based on their own knowledge or their own reflection. And then when I'm ready to move on, after I feel like we've discussed question 1, we can click next. And now we're on question 2. So, and you can toggle back and forth and, reference the work that they did in the last question and then go on from there. So that's Socrative in a nutshell. You can use it for anticipatory sets like a warm-up activity. You could use it for exit tickets. So thinking now, what could you use it for in your classroom? Maybe you're one of those uber diligent people who does a closure every day. Which I think is fabulous because I'm terrible at closures. Yeah, at the start, ask what questions they have from yesterday's lesson. Excellent idea. Yes. Yep. Bell ringers, group work. Yep, similar to Plickers for sure. It doesn't have bells and whistles like Kahoot does or anything, but sometimes you don't want bells and whistles. There's only so much Kahoot music you can hear in a week. Check on older material for review. Excellent. These are all great ideas of how you can use it. And you're very fast to think of these, so kudos to you. Okay, so another suggestion for you for making a more active classroom is called Padlet. I think that it should be sending you to an example of a Padlet right now. Padlet is essentially an online bulletin board where students can post their responses to questions. So this is an example of a Padlet that I've made in the past. And the students, when they log in, they put their answer up here, and then we can use that to talk about it. And really, because I've shared this link with you all could throw in an answer too. This is kind of a totally random topic that I launched in a college class I was teaching, so you might not know what I'm talking about. But anyway, the point is, it's very easy to use. All you have to do is double click, and you're ready to formulate a response. And if you decide against it, you can delete it at any time. Now, one of the great things about Padlet, as you might have seen if you started double clicking anywhere, is that once I write the title of Magistra's response, you can actually toggle it so that the students have to log in with their Google account so that it tracks their answers. If I do something like that, when I go to write something, I can type and I can have a formal written answer, which seems like, a pretty straightforward thing to do. But look at all these options that you have down here. If I click more, these are all the things that I can do with Padlet. These are the ways that I can create a response for the question at hand. I can upload a file, so I can put an image up there that represents something. I can put in the URL for any link that I find that might answer the question. You can use Google to search for all these things. You could take a photo from the camera on your computer. You can capture a video that also captures your response. You can just do a voice recording that encourages students to respond, or that has the students' response to it. You could have them do a screencast that records their screen that encourages them to respond that way, to maybe explain their work. You know, this is my homework. These are the ones that I struggled with, but I think that number 9 I was really strong on and I really understood what I was doing. And but then, you know, in number 10, practicing the language, you know, I don't know what I was doing. Drawing enables students to draw on a canvas. You know, some students like being able to, you know, make an artistic representation of how they feel or what they're doing. You can add a location on a map, which has some limited application for what we're talking about, at least. And then obviously linking to a Padlet, which has even less application to our current topic. But that gives you a really wide variety of what you're able to do with the students. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do then with Padlet. You could use Padlet for discussion. You could have students responding to a variety of different comprehension questions, or, you know, debating, you know, the character of Salvius or the character of Modestus, or, you know, did Modestus, you know, get his just deserts in Amor Omnia Vincit? You know, or Bulbus, I guess, was the one who got his just desserts. So you could encourage discussion among your students that, again, helps them think about the content in a critical and analytic way. But again, you know, encouraging them to share. For what it's worth, you can also do a Padlet in an anonymous fashion as well, so that you can just encourage students to think clearly without worrying about the repercussions of being wrong or right. You could have the students read a story in Latin and formulate questions, either for each other or for you. You could also have them contribute predictions. You know, we've read this story in class. What do you think is going to happen next? This is another great venue for a closure activity. You know, just throw it up on the screen and have students put in their 2 cents. You could use it outside class for a homework assignment. You can continue an in-class discussion. I got this great suggestion a bunch of years ago from a history teacher, well, from the students of a history teacher. And the student said that it was a very quiet student. And he said that he really liked his history teacher because his history teacher graded them on their participation in discussion. But after every graded discussion class period, that teacher put the discussion question up on some online source, and you could write a response to the discussion that would be included in your participation grade. And he felt like that was an important thing because he was not very forward in class, and he didn't raise his hand all the time. And sometimes, depending on the class, there are really, really almost overly participatory kids that, you know, the shyer kids kind of just stay in their corner and they don't want to engage because they feel like they have to compete with their volume. So maybe continue an in-class discussion by using a Padlet for homework and having kids contribute their ideas that way. You could continue the story reading that you might have done in class. You could contribute to a variety of different grammatical identifications on a story. Collaboratively create a mind map. I don't have to read the whole thing to you here. But the submission types allow for you to do a lot of different things. You could do a jigsaw discussion about stuff. So Padlet, I think, is a really cool tool. They did just change their freemium structure, as it's called. So there is still a free version of Padlet, although it limits you to the number of pads that you can have. So just keep that in mind. On another note, the Socrates tool that I showed you, that's also, I've only used the free version of it. There is a professional version of it, but to be 100% honest, don't tell anybody. I don't think it's worth the money because I don't think you really get that much or that much more to really warrant the cost. Pairdeck is also freemium, as they say, because obviously it's an add-on to Google Slides, so we all have that for free. but there are some premium features that are available if you have a subscription to it, like the takeaways, like the integration with Google Classroom. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that before I went on. All right, so when we were talking about Padlet, we said that there is the possibility of students capturing a video of themselves for their response. And I have an even better tool for just that singular skill, and that is called Flipgrid. There's this, very often used, adage that we have as teachers, we should meet them where they are. And right now our students are using their phones for communication. So let's have them use their phones for Flipgrid. Right now, the Pairdeck presentation should be sending you to flipgrid.com, where I have a special Flipgrid classroom just for our class here tonight. And it's going to ask you to record a selfie video as part of the discussion. So because you are all muted, you can feel free to record whatever you want on the Flipgrid, and then as I'm showing Flipgrid more globally, we'll be able to, we won't necessarily look at your responses. You can still be anonymous, don't worry. So Flipgrid is a way that you can have students record a video in a discussion-like format. I'm going to come back to this slide in just a second. I just want to show you what Flipgrid looks like. So in Flipgrid, you create different grids, and a grid is almost like your classroom. It's an organization for your all your students who are at the same level. I will suggest that you have a different grid for each class that you have, not each prep, because you don't necessarily want, if you have like 70 kids in Latin 2, bless your heart, by the way, but if you have 70 kids in Latin 2, you don't want to have one assignment for all 70 kids. You want to be able to sort of break it down a little bit, mostly for your own sanity. So, and then within each grid, you have different topics, and the topics will elicit different responses. So this is my student reflection classroom. And then this is your current assignment that you may or may not be working on, and that's called Let's Connect. To create a topic or to create an assignment for the students, you would click on this blue part. You can give it a title. This is an area for you to kind of give like a best practice to the student about, this is a good way, or this is, what I'm looking for in a way. You can adjust the video response time from a 15-second, like a quick take on something, or maybe a 5-minute overview of the story. Like maybe you want the student to really go back and dig in and, really explain a lot of intricate details. This is where you have like the exact language for your question or for the discussion question that you're giving to the students. Now, video moderation, this is an interesting piece of Flipgrid because depending on how you want to use Flipgrid, you will moderate your video or not moderate it. If you want all the students participating in one class-wide discussion, then don't moderate your videos. Because if you you want students to be able to interact with each other, you want them to see what each other submitted for their video. To moderate means every time a student submits a video, you get an email that says, so-and-so submitted a video. Do you want to add it to the class? And in the case of a very personal reflection topic, you don't always want to do that. You want to encourage students to have an individual voice that's talking about their own perspective on the situation or their own interpretation of the grammar or whatever. This is topic status, which means you can actually plan ahead. You can launch a Flipgrid topic that will only go live in your classroom next week if you really want to. As far as topic resources, these are things that you can provide the students to help them figure out what exactly you're looking for. I gave my students last year a Flipgrid assignment. If you are familiar with Unit 3, there's the part of, I don't remember what stage it's in offhand, but Salvius figures out that Bulimicus is plotting to get more than what Salvius thinks that he's worth. And so Polymachus is going around town. He's boasting that Salvius is going to be treating him right, and he's going to be sitting royally because he's helped to dispose of Cogidebnus et al. And so there's this dinner party that takes place over two different stories, and not dinner party, it's just Salvius and Polymachus. And in the first story, Salvius keeps buttering up Polymachus because Polymachus has no idea that Salvius is really going to kill him. And so Polymachus has this like lovely dinner and he's drinking, and Salvius starts making all these hints about where he's sending him to become the king. And as it happens, it's this like sort of terribly ironic statement that you're going to be the king of the underworld. But Polymachus doesn't know that at the end of the first story. So I had my students do a Flipgrid in between that story and the next one. And I said, okay, I want you to be Polymachus and I want you to do a confessional in the style of The Office, because I know that all my kids happen to watch The Office. Well, I had a really strong number of students who heard the word confessional and they made it into a religious video. And they were like, oh, forgive me, Father, I have sinned against Salvius. And it was actually kind of funny. But in hindsight, I was like, oh, wow, hold on. I did not obviously explain that correctly. So what I did was I found a clip of The Office on YouTube and I attached it as a topic resource. And I said, this is what I mean by this is a confessional. And then the next group of kids who did it, they understood what I meant by confessional. So that's the way you can use topic resources. Sorry, it's kind of a long story to get there, but it's an amusing one. You can have attachments to the topic too, so you can attach a Google Doc or something like that. And then there are video features. The kids love this stuff. I don't really care one way or the other if they can do stickers and drawings and stuff like that, but they seem to like it a lot. And then they can do reactions to each other's videos too. And then once you have all that data, you just create topic and you go live, and then you start to have discussions about stuff. So this is what I was starting to read before. So students react to a story that they read in class, or you could have them react to an activity. Maybe you play a new game for the first time, or maybe they do a cooperative activity, and then you have students talk about, I felt like I was doing more work than most of my partners, or, I didn't really put my best foot forward because I still clearly don't understand the participles that were part of the activity. You could use those Flipgrid resources to have students watch a TED Talk or, a PBS type video about one of the cultural areas that you're studying and have them compare and contrast to what they know from the Cambridge text. You could have them examine archaeological evidence of the Romans. You could give them a series of images or a link to, somebody's blog or a news article that, they've unearthed more ruins, and have them explain the significance of what they found to the topic that you're studying in class. Again, you could use Flipgrid to continue the discussion, to allow quieter students to participate in, a quieter fashion. And then, reenact scenes from the voice of a different character through the lens of a different character. So these are all ways that you could use Flipgrid as a reflective tool in your classroom. So quickly, and I do want to move on because I have a couple of other cool things to show you. How do you think you could use Flipgrid in your next week of lessons that are coming up?
While they're doing that, Stephanie, you have a question here that I think is one you need to address.
Sure.
It says, do you have e-learning days? Would this work when kids have snow days and they are doing the lesson at home?
We don't have e-learning days, but yes, this would be a phenomenal tool to have students do at home, because you could have a student, walk you through how they go through a story or how they translate something, or if you want them to do like practicing the language sentence, have them like narrate their process, instead of just giving them 10 sentences and saying, okay, do it, because you don't know what kids are kind of doing on the outside. But if you have them narrate their process through Flipgrid while they're doing it, I think that that's a really great way of kind of, at the very beginning, you were talking, one person mentioned on the Pairdeck student accountability. This is a great measure for student accountability from that aspect too. But yeah, you could definitely have the students or have them do whatever you want them to do on their e-learning day, and then when they get back to class the next day, have them reflect on how long it took them. Did it take them longer than it should have, or did they have trouble with it? You know, something like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Review, addressing a character in a book, quick responses to story readings. Yeah, I mean, I know that like a minute 30 is sort of the bottom line there, but maybe you could have them just do a 30-second summary. You know, we're reading the story in class, we're doing an overview of it, maybe you're just doing comprehension questions, but now I want you to summarize the whole thing in 30 seconds. Recording of them practicing reading out loud is also a phenomenal use of Flipgrid as well, so that, you know, it's just you and them looking at that. So there's one other thing I want to hit on. I know I'm pressed for time, so I'm going to kind of go through it fast. Well, I'll let you consider that. I'm going to give you all a link to this presentation afterwards, and then you can consider all the Flipgrid considerations. All right, but the last thing I want to think about in terms of reflection in the classroom is feedback. And the way that we give feedback to students is really the way that we want them to give feedback to us, but also we want them to give feedback to themselves in how they're thinking about their own process and their own knowledge level and their own capacity. So the way that we give feedback really has to be a model for our students. So I want to talk today about personalized comments and the things that we write to students and ways that we can kind of make it easier. Originally, when I thought I had lots of time, I was going to ask you how you currently give feedback to students, but unfortunately, we don't really have time for a Q&A part of this. But I'm going to offer you two different versions of what you can do for feedback to students. Number one, as of the newest update to Google Classroom, you can give what are called canned comments, well, what I call canned comments at least. Pardon me. You can set different comments in assignment and then just automatically load them as you're reviewing a document. They do have a new feature now for how you grade assessments. So I'm going to open that up really quickly. Yes, I got that. Let's see here. All right, so this is a culture reading that they did. Let me get to this student's work here. Obviously, you know that now you can kind of toggle back and forth between the student's work using these arrow keys at the top or just doing this drop-down menu. When you go to give feedback to a student, over here is a comment bank, and you can add different comments to the comment bank. So you can click here to add it. And then when you go back here and you want to put a comment in, you click this comment box, you press the plus sign, and you start typing in the comments. No, maybe it's not the plus sign. Well, the plus sign is tagging a person. Why am I totally blanking on this? Oh boy.
Because you work all day?
You guys are going to fire me.
No.
You could do it this way. I'll do it the slow way. Not the slow, but the less efficient way here. Copy to clipboard, and now I'm going to go ahead and paste it right in. Okay. So then you just click comment. I'm not actually going to comment on it because this is from like last month, and the kid's not going to know what I was doing with this document tonight. So I'm going to cancel it right now. But there is a way to kind of have these comments at the ready. But the thing I really also wanted to show you is a tool called Kaizena, and this is also in my presentation. Kaizena allows you to do comments that are feedback comments, but one of the great things about Kaizena is you can do voice comments. And so I wanted to show you this really, really fast.
Stephanie, take your time. I mean, if we're over by a few minutes.
Okay. Okay. I read this study once that students actually said that when their teachers gave them verbal comments in the course of a conversation, they listened to them more often than they read written comments on their essays. And, that might have just been one study in one school at one time. But that is enough evidence for me to try to do this more often. So instead of, giving a written comment like, wow, that sounds a lot like what the textbook says, now I can record a voice message that says something similar, but maybe in a more explanatory way. Sometimes when we give feedback, we kind of give it in, and I do this all the time too, I kind of give it in a flat way, like, oh, great job. What does that really mean, though? But if I use Kaizena, I could say, hey, you did a really good job explaining your thesis statement, and your evidence is really strong throughout the whole essay. That kind of statement carries a lot more weight. And yet I feel like if we had to type all that stuff, it kind of gets a little bit, burdensome, if you will. But to record your voice really fast is, I think, a great use of your time. The other thing that Kaizena brings to the table is this option here, this little light bulb that says attach a lesson. If you start working with Kaizena, which is free, you start going to the Kaizena website, and what you can do is you can have these like prefabricated lessons. So maybe your students have this, rampant problem that every time they see a participle, they always make it a perfect passive participle, even though there are perfect active participles. So what you do on Kaizena is you develop a lesson, quote unquote, which is a verbal lesson with, a text demonstration. It can be an integration of both of those things. And then it almost becomes like a sound bite that every time this student doesn't do the right type of participle, all I have to do is, instead of doing a regular comment, I can attach the lesson that says, don't forget, we also know perfect active participles, and this is what it looks like and sounds like and all that other stuff. If, think about how frequently your students kind of make the same mistakes in a lot of ways. This could save you oodles of time in terms of, giving them more constructive feedback. I know that like when I grade tests and stuff, if a student's tense is off, I'll write tense, and by the time they get to like 4 or 5, I'm just writing T and hoping that they get the message, right? But if you have Kaizena and you say, your verb tenses need a little bit of work, maybe you can come and meet with me to review them. Or, yes, that's funny that you confuse the present with the perfect tense. That's often something that's, that's mistaken. This is how you can tell the difference. And then you just pop that sound bite in every single time a student needs that refresher course. So, I think, I'm not going to read everything to you. And I don't want to make you do this last activity if you really don't want to, because I know I'm over time. But I hope that I've given you tonight some suggestions of how you can make your classroom and your teaching more reflective and encouraging students to think more about their process and about your class and about the content that, number one, you're presenting, but also that they are responsible for completing in a constructive and meaningful way. Oh, good, we have a few responses. So this is one of those draggable slides. So we have somebody using Kaizena, somebody using Flipgrid, somebody wanting to use Pairdeck. That's excellent. That's really excellent. So thank you all so much for joining me tonight. Oh, we have another Flipgrid fan and another Pairdeck fan. This is lovely. So I hope that this has been helpful. And you have my email address, so please feel free to drop me a line anytime. I know I tend to talk kind of fast and I tend to really overload information at times. So if you want me to go over anything, I'm more than happy to do that.
Well, Stephanie, it was fabulous, and don't worry about it. I don't think you were too fast for any of us.
Okay.
A chance to operate along with you, I think, really helps everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, and Stephanie, we have a question. Do students have to have the Kaizena extension in order to hear your comments?
I believe so, but it's a free extension. It's actually an add-on within Docs, but it's still free. So hopefully that helps.
Is there a learning curve real quickly for the kids with a lot of these different things? Like when you introduce them, obviously, like with your freshmen, it take a month or a couple months to get everybody?
Not quite that long, but it does take them, usually the first assignment that you do with any one of these softwares, that you're going to have a fail or two or three. You're going to have kids who are like, oh, I didn't know how to download the app, or I didn't remember the code, or I didn't write it down, or, all this other stuff. But after the first time, they do tend to get with it a little bit.
Wonderful.
Holly, thank you so much. That was all really terrific information. And
Thank you.
Yeah, really well done. Thank you so much. And to all of our participants, thank you for joining us this evening. And we hope to see you again soon.